The message arrived on a Tuesday morning. Every screen on Earth flickered at the same moment. Every phone, every television, every computer displayed the same alien symbols before the translation kicked in. The galactic hegemony had found humanity, and they had demands. Ambassador of the Hegemony Council sat in his command throne aboard the diplomatic vessel, hovering just beyond Earth's moon. His four eyes blinked in sequence as he reviewed the tribute order one final time. 17 species had received similar orders in the past 1,000 cycles. All 17 had submitted within hours. Some had begged, others had cried. A few had attempted weak resistance before their leaders surrendered their people to avoid destruction. The tribute order was simple. Humanity would provide 30% of their population for labor in hegemony mining colonies. They would surrender all military vessels and weapons. They would pay an annual resource tax of 40% of their planetary output. In exchange, the hegemony would allow them to continue existing. Considered it generous. They had been given only 6 hours to comply. Humanity received a full 24. This was because the Council found humans mildly interesting. Their rapid technological advancement over mere centuries had caught attention. Their violent history suggested they might be useful as shock troops after proper conditioning. The hours passed slowly aboard the diplomatic vessel, spent the time reviewing intelligence reports about Earth. Humans were carbon-based, relatively fragile, short-lived creatures. Their average barely exceeded 80 cycles. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. Their bodies could be crushed by species half their size. They required constant hydration and became useless after mere days without sleep. Yet something in the reports troubled him. A footnote mentioned that humans had once walked to their moon simply because it existed. They had split the atom because they wanted to see what would happen. They had created weapons capable of destroying their entire species, and then continued developing more powerful ones. The analyst who wrote the report had flagged this behavior as irrational, dismissed it as primitive aggression. 23 hours into the waiting period, received word that a human delegation was approaching. A single shuttle craft, moving at unremarkable speed, carrying what appeared to be a small diplomatic team, smiled with his secondary mouth. This was the surrender. It always came. The human shuttle docked without incident, ordered his guards to escort the delegates to the main chamber. He wanted witnesses for this moment. Representatives from 12 hegemony species gathered in the observation galleries. This would be broadcast across the empire as proof of hegemony power. The doors opened. A single human female walked through. She was small even by human standards. Gray hair framed a weathered face. She wore a simple dark suit with a small pin on her collar that depicted a blue and green sphere. Earth. She carried no weapons that the scanners could detect. She brought no gifts, no offerings, no signs of submission. Leaned forward on his throne. Behind the human female, he could see her shuttle through the transparent docking bay. It was empty. She had come alone. The silence in the chamber stretched uncomfortable. The gathered representatives whispered among themselves. No species had ever sent a single representative to a tribute submission. It was an insult. It suggested they did not fear the hegemony. The human stopped 10 meters from the throne. She did not bow. She did not kneel. She simply stood there with her hands clasped behind her back. Waited for her to speak first. Protocol demanded it. The conquered always spoke first. They always begged, explained, negotiated. They always tried to find some small mercy. The human said nothing. Minutes passed. His patience wore thin. His secondary hearts began to race with growing irritation. No species had ever made the hegemony wait. He decided to break the silence himself, though it grated against every diplomatic tradition. He asked if humanity understood the terms of the tribute order. He asked if they comprehended what would happen if they refused. He explained, in great detail, the fate of how their cities had burned, how their children had been separated from parents and sold across the empire, how their planet now served as a waste disposal site for 17 systems. The human listened. Her expression did not change. When finished speaking, she reached into her jacket pocket. Guards tensed, weapons powered up. The human pulled out a small piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. She cleared her throat. And then she spoke the only word humanity would ever offer to the galactic hegemony. The word was simple, common, unremarkable in isolation. Yet the way she spoke it made blood chill in his four hearts. She did not shout. She did not scream. She simply stated the word as if it were the most obvious thing in the universe. The word was no. The chamber erupted. Representatives screamed for blood. Guards raised weapons. Himself rose from his throne, all pretense of diplomatic composure abandoned. He demanded to know if humans understood what they had just done. He explained that their planet would burn, their species would be scattered, their history would be erased. The human folded the paper and returned it to her pocket. She smiled. It was not a nervous smile or a frightened smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something others did not. She spoke again. She told that humanity had discussed the tribute order. Every nation, every leader, every citizen had been consulted. The vote had been unanimous across a population of 12 billion. The answer was no. It would always be no. And if the hegemony wanted to change that answer, they were welcome to try. Then she told something that made his primary heart stop. Humanity had been watching the hegemony for 30 years. They had captured and studied hegemony probe vessels. They had decoded hegemony communications. They knew about every species that had submitted. They knew the exact size of the hegemony fleet. They knew the locations of every major colony, every military installation, every council world. They also knew something the hegemony had tried to keep secret. The hegemony had never actually fought a war, not a real one. They conquered through intimidation. Their fleet was designed for suppression, not battle. Their weapons were effective against civilians but worthless against hardened military targets. Humanity, on the other hand, had done nothing but fight wars. Their entire history was written in blood. They had spent centuries perfecting the art of killing each other. Nuclear weapons, biological agents, kinetic bombardment systems, weapons that could crack continents, weapons that could poison atmospheres, weapons so terrible that humans had agreed never to use them against each other. But aliens were not protected by those agreements. The human told that 6 hours ago, Earth had launched 17,000 nuclear missiles toward the hegemony home world. The missiles traveled through a technology humans had reversed engineered from captured probes. They would arrive in 4 days. Demanded to know why humans would doom themselves. His fleet could destroy Earth 100 times over. Humanity would be extinct before those missiles ever landed. The human agreed. Earth might fall. Humanity might be scattered. But the hegemony would lose their capital, their council, their seat of power. And hidden on 1,000 ships fleeing in every direction, humans would survive. They would rebuild. They would remember. And they would spend the next 1,000 years hunting down every species that had stood in this chamber and watched. She told that humans were not afraid to die. They were afraid of being slaves. They were afraid of watching their children taken. They were afraid of losing everything that made them human. If the choice was between slavery and mutual destruction, humans would choose destruction every single time. Then she asked a question. She asked how many of his 17 conquered species still remembered their culture, how many still spoke their old languages, how many still practiced their traditions. The answer, she knew, was 0. The hegemony erased everything that made conquered peoples unique. It was easier to control populations without identity. Humans, she explained, would rather cease to exist than become empty shells serving hegemony masters. The chamber fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. The representatives who had screamed for blood now looked at each other with new expressions: fear, calculation, doubt. Asked what humanity wanted, his voice had lost its confidence. The human smiled again. She said humanity wanted one thing. They wanted the hegemony to leave their solar system and never return. In exchange, humans would cancel the missile strike. They would agree to peaceful trade relations. They would share certain technologies that the hegemony had never developed. But if any hegemony vessel ever returned with hostile intent, humanity would launch everything they had. Not at the hegemony home world, at every hegemony world. They had already identified 74 targets. They were prepared to reduce the entire empire to ash if necessary. She called it their doctrine of mutual assured destruction. Humans had lived under this principle for centuries. They were comfortable with it, were the hegemony. Looked around the chamber. He saw fear in eyes that had never known it. He saw the representatives calculating odds, measuring threats, reconsidering their support for military action. The hegemony had never lost a world. The thought of losing 74 was unimaginable. He asked for time to consult with the council. The human said he had 1 hour. Then she would return to her shuttle and await the decision. If the decision was wrong, the missiles would continue on their path. There would be no second negotiation. The hour that followed was chaos. The full Galactic Council convened via emergency transmission. Voices screamed. Accusations flew. Some demanded immediate destruction of Earth. Others pointed out that the missiles were already in and could not be intercepted. A faction suggested calling the bluff, but intelligence analysts confirmed that humans had indeed captured hegemony probes. The technology was certainly possible. One elderly council member spoke the truth that nobody wanted to hear. The hegemony had built its power on fear, but fear only worked when others were afraid to die. Humans clearly were not. Everything the hegemony had constructed over 1,000 years assumed that species preferred survival to resistance. This assumption was broken. If word spread that a primitive species had the hegemony and survived, others might follow. The survivors might revolt. The labor colonies might rebel. The entire foundation of hegemony power rested on the belief that resistance was futile. Humanity had just proven that belief wrong. The vote was close, but in the end, survival won over pride. The Hegemony Council agreed to withdraw from human space. They agreed to establish formal diplomatic relations. They agreed to pretend this negotiation had never happened. When the human was informed of the decision, she nodded as if she had expected nothing else. She walked back to her shuttle without another word. As the shuttle departed, watched it disappear into the black. He realized something then. Humans had not just refused the tribute order. They had fundamentally altered the balance of power in the galaxy. Every conquered species would eventually learn what happened here. The secret could not be kept forever. And when they learned that a single word could shatter hegemony authority, they would remember it. No. It was such a small word, but it contained everything the hegemony had tried to destroy: pride, identity, the willingness to die standing rather than live kneeling. Ordered his fleet to withdraw. As the ships turned away from Earth, he could not shake the feeling that the age of hegemony dominance had just ended. Not with a battle, not with a war, but with a single word from a species the Council had dismissed as primitive. The universe would never be the same.